Hey Joyce, welcome back to Age Better. I think this is visit number 4. Am I right?
I think so. It's always such a joy and a pleasure to spend time with you.
And today we're talking about, unlike our other conversations where we talked about actually bone health and walking, we'll probably talk about those things too, of course, because we always like to find a way to get those in. But today we're talking about what is considered an epidemic in this country, if not the world, and especially, Vivek Murthy, who is our U.S. Surgeon General, calls it an epidemic, and that is loneliness. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And what are your thoughts on loneliness, and why do you think it's such an issue? I mean, being called an epidemic in this country.
So interestingly, I had the honor to interview Dr. Murthy for my podcast several years ago when he was on hiatus from his role as Surgeon General. And he has written a brilliant book called Together, which digs really deep into the reasons he believes for the loneliness epidemic and the impact that it has on us as individuals and as a society. And it's so far reaching.
It really, really is. What are some of the things that he said that some of the reasons are that this is happening in the country?
It was a long time ago, actually, that I interviewed him at this point because it was pre-pandemic. So it's really interesting to emphasize that we have been talking about these things, or some people have been talking about these things long before the pandemic made it worse.
Right.
And I sort of merge some of what I've read and what I believe, and something that how I've often put it is that we as human beings were meant to raise up our families in community with our sisters and our aunties and our cousins and everybody all around supporting our families. We are not meant or wired to raise up our families behind a white picket fence at the end of a long driveway.
Mm-hmm.
The whole way that we are choosing to live, frankly, the whole, using air quotes, American dream,
Mm-hmm.
fosters a separation and a loneliness. Yeah.
It's really true. And it's interesting that you point out that his book was written before the pandemic, because when we think about loneliness, or when we talk about loneliness now, we think, oh, sure, it's because of the pandemic. But no, this has been brewing for a very, very, very long time. So what are some of the most common misconceptions about loneliness, Joyce?
I, as you know, have run several workshops on building friendships and creating connections. And the two things that come out over and over again is people believe that if they are lonely, they are alone. And when you get a group of people together and create a safe space and give them the opportunity to share their challenges they have making connections, deepening those connections, their feelings of loneliness, one of the tremendous aha moments is this moment of like, wow, you feel that way too?
Mm-hmm.
So what I always say to people is if you feel alone, if you feel lonely, you are not alone. So that's number one. And number two, and this does come out of the research, people believe that if they're lonely, there's something wrong with them.
Mm-hmm.
And it creates this cycle of there must be something wrong with me. There must be a reason that people don't connect with me or I don't connect with them. And that causes people to withdraw. And then you withdraw and you become lonelier, and the cycle perpetuates itself in a very negative way.
Mm-hmm. I have to take a cough break. Sorry, this will be edited out. I just did a very long interview right before talking with you, which is why we had to move it. And I think I talked myself out. Okie doke. Sorry about that, everyone. Why do we think that loneliness is such a big thing for people in midlife? I mean, I could see where for men it really could be, especially if they've stopped working. And, so many people define themselves by their work and their job and their career. And maybe they stop doing that and they're like, oh my God, where am I? What do I do now? And they don't have that social connection that women really are so good at creating. But I mean, I'm reading that even women in midlife are really confronting loneliness. So what's your takeaway on this, Joyce?
Absolutely. It's multi-pronged, of course, and there are not universal causes for a really complicated problem. And I use the word problem advisedly, intentionally, because it is a problem. But women in midlife, many of us, similar to men, worked. And that work community creates a lot of those kinds of social connections. And that leads me to something I want to be sure we talk about around what social connections matter. So there's that piece of it. There's also an element, and most women I know who have raised children will
Mom friends.
Exactly. Mom friends.
I have those.
What's so interesting, and I say this with no disrespect to the mom friends, some of those mom friends are friends of situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Because
sure.
you like them, your kids get along, but they're not necessarily the deep friends that you would choose, those heart to heart, your people. So when you don't have that commonality of raising up children, those friendships often deteriorate, number one. And if they don't, they require, or regardless, I suppose I should say, they require a lot of nurturing and attention. It's very easy to maintain those relationships when you see that mom at drop-off every day.
And you grab a cup of coffee together.
Exactly what I was going to say.
Which is what I used to do. I mean, I remember those days. But in my case, I feel very fortunate. There were several mom friends going back 25 years for me who have remained very close friends, very dear friends. And, we entered midlife together. And we're navigating life, going into our 50s, 60s together. And that's so important to me. And I know it's important to them as well. But of course it takes work. And I think any relationship takes work, whether it's a marriage, a partnership, or a friendship. Of course, a parent, a child, it all takes work and attention, nurturing. I think is really it. But let's talk about you for a minute, Joyce, and your work. For quite a number of years, you had a very successful business, 99 Walks. In fact, when you've come onto the show before, we talked about 99 Walks, why you started it, what you feel it does for people who are a part of that community. And you had a weekly walk and talk where people walked, where they listen. I was one of your guests on that. It's such a great idea. But now you have decided to wind it down. Tell us about that, and tell us about how you're going to focus more on this concept of loneliness going forward.
So I would like to actually go back to the first idea of 99 Walks, which is a story that I don't tell all that often, or I haven't in certainly many years. But I had a close group of girlfriends with whom I walked very regularly. And as anybody who's had that experience knows, when you're walking with your girlfriends, you talk about everything. And it forms bonds that are, I believe, really unique. And it was just really good for me, mentally, emotionally, physically, all the things. So I came home from one of these walks one day with my dear friend Anne Marie, and my husband, who's been my business partner for 25 years, took one look at me and he goes, I think there's something to this walking thing. I said, exactly. And he said, no, as a business, if we can find a way to connect people to walk together, I think we could do a lot of good and build a meaningful business. And that started a year of conversations around, is there a business that's focused on bringing people together to experience not just the power of walking, but the power of walking together in community? And that was the original problem we were trying to solve. And we were working through various iterations of that and launched in a early beta kind of way and started building an app to power the whole thing. And then the pandemic. And like so many businesses, we had to really shift to, okay, how do you build connections virtually? And we grew from there. But the original vision and conversation was around the power of what happens when people come together.
So very much connected to what you're going to be doing as you forge ahead into the future.
For sure, for sure. So as I like to describe it, in our past several businesses, we went very broad, tens of thousands of people in our business before 99 Walks. We reached 3 million families and moms each month, really big and broad. And what I have learned about myself at this, I hate to use the expression, right, but at this stage of my life, is I want to go less broad and more deep. I miss those deeper conversations, those smaller cohorts, seeing relationships forging in smaller cohorts. So that's what has informed really the next phase for me.
So just creating a deeper bond with people and really helping them, and especially with a focus on midlife women. Am I right? Or
Many of my clients are midlife women. So I have a coaching practice where I'm working one-on-one. Initially, I thought it would be almost all midlife women, but what I am finding is actually women. I don't know, Barbara, how do you define midlife? Give me a number, give me an age, right?
probably 50 and over.
All right. So I have several clients in their 40s.
Okay.
So
Pre-midlife.
Pre-midlife.
Or midlife, You know what? It's all a mindset anyway, if you wish.
For sure. But what I'm seeing is that people in general, women in particular, at least because that's the people with whom I work, they're asking themselves these bigger questions around, how do I want to live? What are the things that are important to me? What are the pillars of wellness that I want to inform my life? And one of those key pillars is connection and friendships.
Well, we do know that there are many, many studies that show that one of the most important tools to extend your health span and hopefully your lifespan, your longevity, is maintaining the social connections. That's so important. We also know that that's been easier for women because of, you referenced a few of them already. You start with your childhood friends and your mom friends as you get older, and then your work friends and so on and so forth, your neighbors. And, women tend to be a little bit more involved in their communities. So you've got this kind of inherent social network, and that really helps women to live longer. This is one of the reasons why that happens compared to men. But we also know that that loneliness can have major impact on your health and well-being. I mean, it's incredible. What has your research told you about how loneliness can impact your health and well-being?
So, as I often like to look at things like this, I look at it through 3 distinct lenses. And the research is unbelievably clear on this. So, looking at the impact of loneliness on your mental health. They have seen a connection between loneliness and mental decline, dementia, Alzheimer's, the full spectrum of mental decline, tied directly to isolation and loneliness. Mental health, they've seen true connections between loneliness and depression, anxiety, even suicide. And then the physical side, which people don't, that's kind of the new place, right? Is to really draw these connections between social isolation and the physical manifestations of that. And it's all the horsemen. It's the horsemen of death, right? Cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, dementia. Oh, I mentioned dementia, so physical, but dementia kind of plays into longevity for sure.
Absolutely.
Obesity, diabetes, all of the things that can take us out.
Let's now connect the dots between loneliness and fitness and exercise and moving. I mean, what you were doing with 99 Walks is you were getting people out there moving during the pandemic and after. And that also was a social thing. It wasn't just a moving your body for a physical health thing, but it was also helping people get together because you actually encourage people to do it together. So what is the connection that you've seen in the research you've done between loneliness and exercise?
I don't know if we've ever talked about this in our prior conversations, but I maintain that there is a problem with our wiring as human beings. You ready?
I'm ready.
We are more likely, the research teaches, to show up if we make a commitment to another person than we are if we make a commitment to ourselves. Now, I think that's a problem because I do think that if we make a promise to ourselves, we should be just as willing to keep that promise than if we make it to another person. But apparently, we're not. So what the research teaches is that if you make a date, even if it's a phone date, which is not as good as walking in person, but hopping on the phone with somebody on a walk is going to be better than you might imagine it to be. We are more likely to show up than if we say, I am going to go to the gym, go for a bike ride, take a walk, whatever it is, at 2:00 today. So there's that piece of it. And then there's what we were talking about a little bit earlier around the deep and profound conversations that we have when we're walking together for a host of reasons.
You know, in fact, that reminds me of something that we did talk about in a prior conversation, a prior episode, which I will have links to those episodes in the show notes, everyone, if you want to go back and listen to them. Joyce is always a fun, engaging guest, so you will enjoy those as well if you haven't yet heard them. But we did talk about some, you know, you called your weekly episodes, your podcast, Walk and Talk. And I just call it a regular walk and talk, meaning I have found in my life that if I have something difficult to talk about, whether it was, with someone in my family, my husband or one of my daughters, or when I was back in corporate America, when I wanted to talk with one of my somebody who worked for me about some job that they were doing not so well and needed some work on, so on and so forth. A difficult conversation, in other words. I found that walking and talking was so much better than sitting down face to face with someone. Now, I know that some might say, oh, face to face, eyeball to eyeball is a better way to do it. I say, nay, nay, nay. I say, nope. I really think, and I can say from experience, it's been very successful having that walk and talk. And also the person who knows maybe they're being chastised, for example, isn't feeling so put upon, their ego isn't being so bruised. It's just, there's so many wonderful things about it, about a walk and talk. So I just wanted to put it out there. So, hey, Joyce, let's talk about people who are listening in now who might be feeling lonely. Not everybody is, of course, but there might be somebody listening who's saying, yeah, I am feeling lonely. I don't have the friends. Maybe I moved. Maybe my husband or wife has passed away, whatever the circumstances. What steps should people take right now, today, that's going to maybe put them on the path to not feeling as lonely?
This opens the door to something I alluded to earlier that I'm so glad I have the opportunity to come back to. The research teaches us that most people have between 2 and 4 close friends. And that can include family. That can include a romantic partner. So the first thing I always like to raise with people is the idea that most people are living in an episode of Friends is just not so. So part of what I believe is driving loneliness is the media portraying these friend groups and social media showing, high school friends of yours who are now out in their 50s or 60s with this big fabulous group of girlfriends, couple friends, and all the things, right? So the first thing is to remember most of that is not true. I don't mean not true. Most of that shows just a sliver of the reality of people's lives.
Right.
So that fuels some of this. Why don't I have that? I will start by saying most people don't have that. The next thing that is really important is the value of casual friendships. So I talk about different circles of friendships. There are your fun friends. These are the people who you can just go have fun with. These are not this is the person I can call in the middle of the night who will drop everything and come to my door.
Right.
Don't underestimate the value of your fun friends. And then there's what I refer to as your coffee shop friends. These are the people who you see on the regular in the coffee shop or whatever your daily routine is, who maybe you don't even know their names, but you have brief social interactions with them about the weather, about the dogs, whatever it is. There is real value in that. And when we talked earlier about this idea that loneliness feeds on itself in a negative cycle, even those little steps help to break that cycle. So that's piece number one. And piece number two, which is critical, is exactly what you said early. Maintaining friendships takes action.
Yeah.
People often say work. I hate to refer to it as work.
Yeah.
It's not work.
Exactly.
It's just
Exactly.
action. Take action.
Yeah. I'm going to stop using that word also.
Right?
Yeah. It's not work. It's action. It's nurturing. It's spending time. It's, putting time into it. You can use a lot of other words and terms to describe the action that you need to take. But yes, you are right. Let's talk about community. Now, community can be so many different things. I have my running community. I'm a runner, and so I belong to a running club. But even beyond the running club, there are people who I know who are runners, and we all connect on social media, certainly in person when we go for runs. And that is super important to me. And this was a late in life thing because I only started running at 50. So I think I bring this up because I think this is a good example of a step that people can take if they have an interest. And I'm sure you'll agree, Joyce, if you have an interest, whether it's running or rowing or biking or knitting, that another interest of mine, whatever it is, just kind of put yourself out there and try to find a group of like-minded people who maybe meet on a regular basis. And if they don't, maybe try to create a group that meets on a regular basis. What do you say, Joyce, about that? Is that an important step, creating a community or joining a community to combat loneliness?
Absolutely. And I'll take it one step further because some of the people with whom I've worked, even that question seems sort of overwhelming. So what I encourage people to do is make a list, actually 3 lists. You ready? List number 1 is what's important to me. And thankfully, different people have different priorities. For some people, it's childhood hunger. For other people, it's elder care. What's important to you right now? And how can you get involved in causes that are important to you? I shouldn't even say causes. How about a cause?
Right.
The second is what's fun for you. Running. And I like to walk. I like to hike. I like to do all the things. I will never join a running club. I shouldn't say never, but
never
that's
say
not,
never. But no, I
never
get
say
it.
never. But that's not. That would not be on my fun list.
Yeah.
And then
has to be fun. Should be fun.
Yeah. So what's on your fun list? And the last thing is, what are you curious about?
Yeah.
And you mentioned rowing. Rowing was something that I was curious about for years and years. And a couple of years ago, I joined a local rowing program and club. I thought I was going to love it. I met lots of people. I've been curious about it. I was sure I was going to love it. I did not love it. I spent the summer rowing. I made some new friends and new relationships.
There you go.
I was curious about it. It is now off my curious list. So what are you curious about? And those 3 lists provide a lot of insight for where to go to find those kinds of communities.
It's so funny. You just reminded me that back, I guess it was about 20 years ago, my husband and I were planning a trip to Italy. And, I've been there before. I didn't care if I spoke Italian, but in this case, we were spending a little bit more time. We were renting a place. And I thought, I want to be, and not in a major city. So I thought, I want to be able to communicate with the local people. And so I studied Italian for about 6 months prior to going on this trip. And that I did create some friends. I went to a local place in New York City, like I think it was twice a week or something like that, and learned the basics, and then made some new friends. And actually, I'm still very much in touch with them 20 years later. And again, they're not my 2 to 4 close friends, my little tribe, but they are there, and they're kind of fun friends.
Yes,
and
exactly.
it's so great to have these little groups of friends that you described. Yeah, really, really good. So these are some tools. What are the tools that people who are listening in right now and saying, okay, my social life has, my social circle is really getting smaller for whatever reason, whatever the reason is, but it's getting smaller, it's shrinking. So what should I do to get out there? What are some tools, Joyce?
2 things that I really love: inviting people for walks.
Yeah.
There's a shock, right? But inviting somebody into your home, especially someone you don't know particularly well, can feel like a lot, both to you and to them. Finding people to walk with tends to have kind of a lower bar of discomfort.
Yes, as we talked about before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
especially as you're kind of getting to, I believe, if you don't know each other well.
Correct. Exactly. So as an entree into some new relationships.
Right.
The other thing I often say is brunch is best. Meaning what I love to do is to host brunches because of a host of reasons. Somehow sitting down to a dinner, again, feels like a lot.
Yes, it's a commitment. And if you're not sure about how that relationship's going to go, ultimately, it's a big commitment.
On your part and on their part. And
Right.
somehow brunch feels a little bit lighter to plan, a little bit less serious as an invitation. And the last thing is be willing to be the fun friend. Be willing to take the chance to put out in the world, let's do something fun. Years ago, there's a long backstory to this, but I thought it would be fun to have a chocolate ice cream tasting event where, you know how they do it with wine tastings?
Yes.
Right, so you cover up the bottle and everybody tastes and they rank it on different
Yes, so
things.
fun.
So this is when my kids were young teenagers, so we invited family, friends, and the kids. A couple of professional chefs and restaurateurs, which just elevated the whole thing. And we taste tested 6 different chocolate ice creams.
So the big reveal, please. Which one won? Do you remember?
Blue Bonnet.
Really?
Yeah.
Have to try it.
Over the Haagen-Dazs, over the Breyers.
I like
and I
Edie's.
do remember.
I like Edie's. I mean, if we're going to go for store-bought, obviously, Edie's is good.
This was all grocery store brands.
That's so fun. Great idea.
It's really fun.
So, but your point is very well taken. Kind of be a fun friend and be a little bit of the instigator, kind of bringing people together. If you don't feel it's going to happen organically in some other way, right?
It's never going to happen organically in some other way. I have a very deep and rich friend group and social life, and if I go dark, it all suffers.
Yeah, no, I hear you. There's always that one person, and you're it, huh? Yeah, I'm kind of that person too. I kind of the driver. We're the drivers. Yep.
Yep.
So everyone listening in, what we're saying is, don't wait for it to come to you. Life is so fun. There's so many fun things to do. Like what Joyce just was saying, what she did with the chocolate ice cream. That's fun and funny, right? So we can do things like that. You can host a little brunch. You can go out for a walk. You can go out for a walk with one person or 3 people. There are so many ways to get out there. It really is true. Even if you're an introvert, and I know that there are a lot of introverts out there. I characterize myself as an introvert. I like to say I'm an introvert unless I can't be. Well, I have to be out in the public, then I'm not. But otherwise, I feel like I am. And I think a lot of us will view ourselves that way. But so just now, we've been talking about what individuals can do Joyce, about, the tools to get started. We came up with a few fun ideas, building different communities, understanding that you have different friend groups, some of which will kind of ebb and flow. But try to always have those 2 to 4 really tight friends that you can go to. But what about on a bigger level? We went from micro, let's go to macro. What about society? What can we be doing more of to combat loneliness?
That's a really good question. I don't have any answers to that, because loneliness is driven by individual connections. It goes back to what I was saying about raising up our families behind a white picket fence. So obviously, right, communities that are built around walkable communities, they've shown that that's helpful.
Right.
But those kinds of almost universal solutions, truthfully, I can't even wrap my head around them.
Yeah.
I can't. It is, I suppose if I was going to say one thing, it's around the media portrayal of what healthy social circles look like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look like Friends.
Mm-hmm. No, the TV show Friends.
Yeah,
It's just like, just wanted to clarify that for everyone.
Sorry, it doesn't. Yeah. And I often come back to that because the TV show Friends was such a cultural phenomenon at the time.
Yep.
And
then
really,
we do compare ourselves to things like that are just not real. I mean, it's Hollywood. And also, I think on the societal level, we have to focus, of course, a bit more on our elderly, who can be very lonely and be alone. I mean, physically alone. And we have to really kind of focus on that too, because we also know that people don't stay put anymore. People for decades, for generations, have been leaving their towns and cities and moving on to other opportunities, other places. And certainly that was true during the pandemic. I mean, more people moved around, as we know, thinking that they were going to be working from home for the rest of their lives. Well, that's not happening, is it? I just read on Amazon, they want everybody back in 5 days a week, no more 3 days a week. So, that is the trend, of course, now. So, but the point is that there are elderly people who have kind of been left alone, and that has to definitely be worked on. However, a lot of these studies are showing that it's the teenagers in this country that really are at most risk for being lonely and therefore having mental health issues and challenges as a result of this loneliness. Now, you mentioned, going on the internet, seeing Instagram, seeing TikTok. Everyone's life looks so fabulous and fun. Why aren't I having so much fun? Why don't I have those friends? I mean, a kid whose brains aren't even fully developed yet, trying to take this all in and is feeling very badly about himself or herself. And that's a real problem too. And which brings me to my next question about technology, how that can be a hindrance. It can really be, not a good thing especially for younger people who do too much comparing, but it can also be a help for people, especially if they are physically isolated, because there are, as we said, older people who are alone. They could be helped by having that connection. So what are your thoughts on that?
In my workshop, actually spend a fair bit of time on the blessing and the curse of social media. And you've just summed it up. For many people, social media provides an opportunity for meaningful connection that they don't have elsewhere for a host of reasons. Some of the most profound communities that have come out of social media are actually around unusual illness, particularly childhood illness. So I'm familiar with communities that have come up around parents whose children have a disease or a disorder that like nobody's ever heard of.
Right.
And they find these wonderful, supportive, educational, informing groups that have been game changing.
Yes, that's a great example. I'm so glad you brought that up, because there are so many organizations that have popped up just organically out of need for, and somebody,
Yes.
there has to be somebody out there who starts it. And then all of a sudden people are, oh, I'm not alone. My child or me, I'm not the only person experiencing this. I had a similar situation, weirdly enough. Right now, more people know about something called POTS, POTS, posture tachycardia syndrome, because of COVID. That is a long COVID, or can be a long COVID symptom. However, I have two daughters. My older daughter, who's now 30, when she was about 14 years old, think about this, before we had any of this going on, she was experiencing this elevated heart rate, and then she would faint. Blood pressure would drop,
Gosh, so
heart rate
scary.
would go up for no reason. No reason. Nobody could figure out what. And finally, because I'm a warrior mom, took a year almost to get to the right doctor who, diagnosed her with having POTS. Only in her case, it was because her vascular system had not kept up with the growth of her body, because she was that day 14 years old. And so her blood was pooling in her gut and wasn't going to her brain. She
Wow.
outgrew it, but she had to be on a pill, on a medicine to help her until everything caught up. The point is, I went online and I found an online group focusing on POTS.
Interesting.
It's like, who ever even heard her pediatrician didn't know anything about POTS. Now POTS is much more well known. But the point is, and that gave me great comfort, and eventually she grew out of it, so, it had a good ending. But even the osteoporosis, Bone Health and Osteoporosis Foundation, where I've been a board member for 10 years, they have an online community that is amazing. The people are so invested in the time they spend in this community, where they compare notes and they help each other. And they've built real friendships. And now, whether those friendships actually kind of, evolve outside of that online community, I have no idea. But while it's happening within that community, it's really working some magic. And it's keeping people feeling, like I'm not the only one. Less lonely is the point. Less lonely.
And if you keep in mind, even if those relationships don't move outside of that group, if you keep in mind one of the profound problems with loneliness that we talked about at the start around how it feeds on itself, if you can reduce those feelings of loneliness, that individual feeling less lonely is more likely to put him or herself out there in the world and break that downward cycle.
Yep.
So social media is super tricky because it has tremendous value and tremendous downside.
Yeah. And I think that's where it is. I don't see that changing anytime soon.
I don't either.
No, I really don't. So, okay, Joyce, always a pleasure. But before we wrap this up, can you please share what are your top 3 takeaways from this conversation about loneliness today?
Can I just give one?
Yes, of course.
Take action. All right, I'll give you 2. If you feel lonely, you are not alone, and there is nothing wrong with you.
Yep. Thank you for that. Joyce, always a pleasure. And I'm really excited about your next chapter. And I know you'll come back on to fill us in on how it's all going.
That would be fantastic, Barbara. Thank you, as always, for the work that you do.